What's good? It's Pat the Flip, and today I'll be reading How Do I Make Learning a Fighting Game Less Boring while playing some Capcom vs. SNK 2. Please subscribe to patreon.com/pattheflip if you want to check out all my other writing, and feel free to leave a comment here if you want to suggest more games for this video series. Thanks for watching! A reader asks, Dear Pat, I'm trying to get my friend into fighting games. He has a pretty extensive background in other competitive games, but says that the process of learning to play a fighting game feels like school compared to Overwatch or Teamfight Tactics. I guess my main questions here are, 1. How do I make labbing, even just the super small things like knowing how to input specials, feel less like homework? Furthermore, how do I help someone translate lab practice into their actual play? Second, how do I help guide someone towards the traditional dopamine receptors that other games provide? And third, how do I best find a way to help a new player shift their goals from winning to getting better? Thanks so much. Well, there is a lot of stuff to dig into here, and understandably so, as this question hits at the heart of why a lot of people don't play fighting games. And that's because getting good can feel like work. Personally, I like that it feels like work sometimes. I like feeling rewarded for putting in effort, especially when that effort requires discipline and creativity and focused thought. And I like being around people who feel like cool things are worth working for, especially somewhat ludicrous things like fighting games. I've written about this before in Why Fighting Games Are Hard and Why Fighting Game Execution is Hard for New Players. To me, these games being hard and requiring the player to work for it is an important part of the unique experience that fighting games provide. Just as your friend is allergic to games that feel like school, I am allergic to games that do not feel like they're worth systematically dissecting, isolating, and refining, because they do not make me feel like my efforts are respected. I generally do not play games that don't make me feel like I could play them for the rest of my life. Instead, I pretty much only play games that make me feel like I could play them every day for the rest of my life and still be bad at them. For the past few years, I have forced myself to play exactly one narrative-driven single-player game per year, because I think it's important to take a break from mashing on fighting games. But if I didn't force myself to play a single-player game, I wouldn't do it. So, before I get to the part where I talk about how to make these games feel less like school, as your friend puts it, I think it's worth being clear with your friend that this is a core aspect of the genre's appeal. And long-term successful engagement with the genre often comes from learning how to change your mentality to enjoy the grind more. Not everyone who plays fighting games feels like this, but I think the ones who are having the best time playing fighting games usually are. If your friend doesn't like that, or doesn't want to become that, you may be better served just letting them do their thing in Overwatch or TFT or whatever. As the old saying goes, it's easier to make friends with fighting game players than it is to make friends into fighting game players. That said, I'm hardly the most disciplined lab monster myself. I do not, generally speaking, pursue truly optimal improvement strategies in the games I play, because to me, part of the fun is in learning to create learning tools and methods that I find enjoyable. And while systematic drilling and lab research is a part of my toolset, it's certainly not the whole plan. I was the kind of student who got A's in stuff I cared about and B's in stuff I didn't, and that carries over to my fighting game practice as well. So let's talk about how to make the grind a little less grindy. Spending time in training mode learning moves, practicing inputs, and figuring out tricky situations is the most efficient way to master most of the various skill tests that a fighting game throws at you. However, sitting down to learn every character's moveset one at a time is the fighting game equivalent of learning a language by memorizing the dictionary. It might be the optimal way to learn that language, but the learning you're doing likely doesn't match the way you'd actually use the language while talking to people in everyday life. Many newer players think they have to master the entire game in training mode before playing their first PvP match, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Just like how languages are typically best learned in immersive environments where your learning is guided by having to do stuff like ask for directions or navigate an ad hoc social situation instead of just studying in a book. The most reliable pattern I'd recommend for day-to-day fighting game practice simply involves playing against a couple human beings, taking notes on specific things that you couldn't figure out how to deal with, and then figuring it out in training mode. You're essentially using your netplay sessions as a search strategy to locate things you don't know about the game. And they feel more relevant than memorizing move lists because you can feel the practicality of learning this stuff quite clearly, since it just beat you up. Instead of practicing something in training mode and hoping it'll be useful in your PvP, you're using your PvP to guide what you practice in training mode. That said, I do recommend learning every character's moves, because the last thing you want in competition is to be surprised by something you've literally never seen before and have no idea how it works. Instead of memorizing move lists in training mode, though, I usually suggest that people learn how to play all the characters over time. I spent a good half a year or so playing a different Exerd character every week, doing their combo challenges and playing them online and everything. And that was hands down some of the most valuable time I've spent playing that game in all my years and hours of playing it. I think a lot of players believe that any time spent not playing their main is a waste or somehow unproductive. But I found that the easiest way to learn a matchup or download an opponent is to have your own experience playing as that character, so that you know what it feels like to play them yourself. You paid for the whole damn game after all, you might as well get your money's worth. For dexterity and muscle memory challenges, like learning special move inputs and combos or practicing throw breaks, it's far easier to level these up in training mode than it is to grind it out in a live match. However, these generally aren't going to click in a single practice session, especially early on in a player's fighting game practice. So, I recommend treating them like the equivalent of warm-ups and drills while practicing a sport or a musical instrument. List the stuff you want to improve on, and do them for a few minutes each before you hop online. Time gating these sessions will make them feel more manageable, and you can add gamey win conditions like execute this move perfectly 10 times in a row on each side before moving on to the next one, to create a goal that feels more satisfying to work towards. You can even make it into a PvP game. If you've ever played the basketball minigame Horse, well, you can do that with combos too. None of this will make fighting games feel quite as natural as mindlessly mashing solo queue or whatever, but it does make the bitter pill of get good a little easier to swallow. So now, it's time to talk about why we choose to do the work in the first place. The satisfaction of a job well done is the feeling of seeing your efforts to do something pay off. The greater the effort, the greater the satisfaction. But in order to supply the energy required to put in that effort, you've got to want it. Without a strong motivation to improve, your friend will never feel inclined to want to put in the work to actually do so, no matter how much you do to make it feel less like work. Right now, it sounds like you are the only reason your friend is playing fighting games, which is fine. But it's not a strong enough motivation to actually dig deep into the game and learn how it works. Your fears that your friend will get discouraged and stop playing the moment you get better are well-founded. Right now, the game requires minimal effort to have a somewhat satisfactory outcome for your friend, but the moment that your friend starts losing, it's going to take some work to get that satisfaction back, and they'll have to choose between doing the work or walking away. There are some people who care so much about beating their friend that they're willing to put in the work. This is the story of countless pairs of friends, roommates, siblings, etc., not to mention Ken and Ryu. However, the reason that those stories are special is because most of the time, a single rivalry is not strong enough to get both players perpetually coming back stronger. And if you look at longtime fighting game competitors, any one of them could probably tell you about rivalries that have motivated them during specific moments in time, but they're usually the exception rather than the norm. So, if you think your friend might have the potential to become an engaged fighting game player, you're going to have to do some legwork in figuring out what will motivate them. The good news is that I have spent a lot of time puzzling this one out for myself, because I've always wondered what it is that causes fighting games to have as polarizing a draw as they do. In my experience, there are a core set of people for whom fighting games are completely irreplaceable as a passion, and nothing else hits quite right. And I believe that their motivations are tied to a combination of the following factors. They like winning, they like developing their mastery, they like performing in front of others, and they like being around other people who like all these things. There are few activities in life that can deliver on all of these motivations, and most of the ones that do aren't video games. This is the reason why I am generally ruined for not fighting games. They simply do not deliver all these motivations to me as effectively as fighting games do. And so the cost of spending a little time in the lab feels like nothing compared to the drag of playing a game where I don't get the thrill of competition, the satisfaction of getting stronger, the attention from other people, and the fantastic community vibes that I get from fighting games. Your friend might not need these things in his life. Maybe your friend has the first two needs satisfied by the other games he plays, doesn't like the attention of being visible, and has his social needs served by work or school or whatever else he's got going on. If that's the case, and you are his only motivation to stay engaged in fighting games, then that engagement will likely not last long term. This is why I think locals are so important to the continued health of any fighting game community. They are often the first place that a new player is exposed to all of the things in the fighting game experience that aren't in the actual game. The first moment that got me hooked on fighting games forever wasn't at EVO. It was at a Capcom vs. SNK cabinet at Laval's Pizzeria in Berkeley, where I mashed out a clumsy anti-air DP and heard a reaction from the people playing around me, watching and waiting for their turn. I had spent almost every year of my life playing video games up until that point, but I had never felt anything like that, and I've spent the rest of my life chasing that Dragon Punch. So take your friend to a local. If you don't have a local, take them to the nearest tournament you can find. Both of you can go 0-2 together, mash casuals, get some pizza afterwards, and talk about what you'll do with each other, together, to get better before the next one. Be your friend's training partner rather than his obstacle, and make him yours as well. It's not guaranteed to work, of course, but I think you'll find that most of us who stuck around for the long haul started with a story that sounds kind of familiar. After all, there's nothing like a good friend to make school suck a little bit less. Thanks for watching.